Welcome to EPF. We continue our line of contact programs, and today we're going to discuss Armenia-Turkey relations on official level, political level. My guest is Richard Kiragosyan, Director of Regional Studies Center. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you.
Richard, the first question, obviously something that interests many of us, is the fate of the football diplomacy. So can we officially say that the football diplomacy is dead or is done, it's a deal, and we have to continue and take it from there? Or there are some chances that there are possibilities that the football diplomacy will continue post-April 24th?
Well, in many ways what we see is, even in a broader context, we see that the title of today's show, Armenian-Turkish Official Relations, doesn't exist. In fact, in what we're doing in support of the effort to normalize, to re-engage in terms of establishing relations, we're trying to solve a problem that is already evident, the lack of relations and the closed border. In terms of football diplomacy, I would say that unfortunately both sides, both Armenia and Turkey, have moved well beyond the original football diplomacy. We could say, yes, it's dead. We could even have a funeral for football diplomacy, so be it. But when we conduct an autopsy of what happened, what was the cause of death of football diplomacy?
Lessons learned?
Well, cause of death first. In other words, we need to recognize what went wrong before we learn those lessons. What actually went wrong was largely a Turkish strategic mistake. And many in Turkey actually see this mistake in terms of Turkey grossly underestimated Azerbaijan's reaction and underestimated the Turkish government's ability to normalize relations with Armenia without Azerbaijan's consent. What this means, however, is the process or outlook for normalization is very much alive and kicking. What we see is the birth of a new opportunity. It's no longer about the two diplomatic protocols that were signed between Armenia and Turkey and Switzerland. Rather, it's implementing the terms of the protocols without the ratification. So therefore, I would argue we graduated beyond football diplomacy to a much more practical, productive, and almost politically astute or prudent level of engagement that is now coming and now starting.
Right, but still about the diagnosis, right? So Turkey was naive enough not to consider Azerbaijan's influence, or they were miscalculating some of the stuff and they weren't really pragmatic in this?
Well, that's a very good question, because what we see after several years of engaging Turks and the Turkish government since the death of the protocols, what we found is a paradox. On the one hand, Turkey was fairly correct in underestimating Azerbaijan's reaction, because for much of the beginning, much of the early period of reaction to the protocol process, Baku and official Azerbaijani policy was not opposed to normalization, but for the wrong reason. They never thought it would work. They never thought that Armenia and Turkey could actually come together and sign the protocols. Therefore, very late in the game, in the football match, very belatedly, they reacted and reacted strongly. Much of the power of Azerbaijan over Turkey is actually due to the fact that Azerbaijan is the #1 foreign investor of all countries in Turkey. And it's beyond energy, it includes media. And they have domestic political constituents and advocates. What this meant for Turkey, however, was even more frustration, where Turkish options, its policy options in the region, even beyond Armenia, are limited to Azerbaijan. In other words, Azerbaijan, as the little brother of the relationship, has far too much power and influence limiting Turkish options. And there is frustration in Turkey over this situation. Therefore, as we move ahead, what we see is the real obstacle to normalization is much less in Ankara or Yerevan and much more in Baku.
Is there any other cause that you are speaking about? Because it's just about Azerbaijan, or maybe this is also kind of manipulated also by Turkey, or presented as it is, our brothers there don't allow us to really make steps forward, or there is anything else?
This is the second element, the political context. Because in reality, in our meetings with then Foreign Minister Ahmet Davutoglu, it was admitted that when Davutoglu became foreign minister, and he's the one who signed the protocols with Foreign Minister Nalbandian, what Davutoglu admitted was he was never happy with the protocols. He wanted, upon being appointed then foreign minister, to renegotiate the protocols because they are the result and work of former foreign minister Ali Babajan. And Davutoglu was never quite happy or satisfied because what was always pointed out was not only what the protocols say, but what they didn't say, in terms of no reference whatsoever to the Armenian genocide, no reference whatsoever to Nagorno-Karabakh. It was an important step in delinking, removing Nagorno-Karabakh as a prerequisite for normalizing relations. It also makes it extremely difficult for Turkey today to try to re-inject or reimpose a direct link with Nagorno-Karabakh. And in many ways, that political context was also a way for some in the Turkish government, such as Davutoglu, to find a convenient way out of fulfilling expectations, of implementing the protocols, and a political reason to actually not lose Azerbaijan. The good news from an Armenian perspective is twofold. One is that this whole process, since the protocols, Armenian foreign policy has become stronger as a result of this, and Turkey's position much weaker in terms of the international context. Secondly, we do see the death of the concept of one nation, two states. The so-called fraternal alliance between Turkey and Azerbaijan is in serious decline, if not full demise.
Is this based on some evidence, or for instance?
For example, what we see is for several years, Turkey has been trying to regain balance in the relationship and has failed. Turkish investment in Azerbaijan has become directly under pressure from the Azerbaijani government, given its corrupt nature. Secondly, Turkish military advisors who were deported from Azerbaijan years ago are still not allowed back in Azerbaijan. Even the military relationship. Russia has overtaken Turkey as the #1 arms provider and military partner for Azerbaijan, not Turkey. Moreover, the newest military allies for Azerbaijan are Israel and Pakistan, not Turkey. This is more evidence of the decline.
How about economy and energy and the new routes probably possibly going through Turkey from Azerbaijan and from Central Asia countries? But, you know, the end of Nabucco.
But
and other...
Turkey's frustration in this energy economic aspect is that they're merely a transit state for Azerbaijan. In other words, it's not Turkey having an upper hand in dominating the export routes, the pipelines, etc. But Azerbaijan as a producer and as the exporter, where Turkey is now relegated to a level of Georgia for Azerbaijan in terms of a vital, but only as a transit state.
So you think that pragmatism will kind of take forward in Turkey-Azerbaijan relations rather than, you know, nationalistic, ethnic,
I think we already see this. We already see this. The only exception, or the minor aberration, was the political, very unpractical attempt by Turkey to have Azerbaijan help in its crackdown against the so-called parallel state, where the Azerbaijani side closed the Gulenist schools within Azerbaijan as a favor to Turkey. Likewise, Turkey has arrested an opposition Azerbaijani journalist, in fact, arrested him on a bus in Istanbul and immediately deported him to Azerbaijan. But these are the aberrations. In other words, the friction, or as we know from WikiLeaks, for example, the personal tension and animosity between President Erdogan and President Aliyev is a very deep fraction and fracture in the relationship. Moreover, if we look at where Azerbaijan is going, first of all, many of the policies of Azerbaijan are embarrassing Turkey in terms of not just improving relations with Russia, but also finding more of a role away from relying on Turkey and clearly not interested in the EU. Azerbaijan is determined to set its own course with much less reliance on Turkey or Turkey as a NATO member or the West. That gives Turkey less leverage over Azerbaijan as well.
Before going into the questions or issues related to the therapy of, like we discussed the causes, then we'll talk what is going on, what can go on afterwards. I cannot not mention about the deal in Lausanne between the West or European Union and the United States and Iran. And the deal about the sanctions or removing the sanctions and continuing the cooperation and development with Iran. So how important is this factor on Turkey-Azerbaijan relations and obviously for Armenia?
Well, actually, you point to something that has significant implications and ramifications for the broader region. In other words, what we see for Armenia first, two specific gains or benefits from this new largely US, but Western deal with Iran. First is the context regionally. Armenia is the only stable country on Iran's borders. It is the only natural platform for both Western engagement and to help Iran re-enter the international community in terms of economics and trade. Moreover, Armenia, in addition to this benefit, if we look at the diplomatic process of engagement between the West and Iran, the two obvious victims or casualties are, of course, Israel and Russia, where Russia is no longer needed by Iran because of sanctions and its isolation.
By the way, have you seen any reaction from Russia? Because Israel has been very critical about this process. However, from Russia, were there any signals from Russia, like blatant signals that they were against or they were opposed, or they have something to say about this?
Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov was engaged in the process and was involved enough to sign off on the deal. Tacit approval, but they have a more practical wait-and-see approach. But my point here is that in many ways, Russia is much more marginal in this process. What's also important is Turkey. Turkey was not involved whatsoever in this process. It was very interesting because it also shows the now marginalization of Turkish-Iranian relations. And in many ways, if we look at the Azerbaijani factor, for the past 2 years, this Iranian government has paid more attention to Azerbaijan than to Armenia and has been trying to improve relations. Now, within this new context, Azerbaijan is much less important. And Iran, as it seems, has successfully brokered a new historic breakthrough to re-engage on a world level.
Is this a good news for Armenia?
Of course. As I said earlier, we are the only stable and friendly neighbor for Iran. Moreover, if we look from a European perspective, Armenia geographically, with a highly educated but very low-cost workforce, also offers unique opportunities for commercial engagement. In other words, setting up subsidiaries or corporate offices here in Armenia for, let's say, French and Italian automakers, for example, to directly engage in the bigger Iranian market. Ironically, the other way, if we look at Armenia's attractiveness to Iran, what we see as well, ironically, as bad as the decision was for Armenia to join the Eurasian Union, what we now see is Iranian interest in using Armenia to engage and to project its products and trade with the broader Eurasian market and with Russia through Armenia.
However, does this also have an impact on Armenia-Turkey relations, or these are different processes?
No, I would say they have a direct impact. One, in terms of, in a general sense, Armenia is now seen as more strategically significant across the region, but also because whether it's as an Eastern Partnership member, but also Eurasian Union member, we can be a bridge or a platform for the West and for Iran at the same time. We never had that before, not at the same time. Secondly, as Armenia is more strategically significant, Turkey is much less significant within the Iran context. And Iran is much less interested in Turkey. Turkey was valuable and viable as a way out of sanctions and isolation. Now it's much less needed, as is Russia. Secondly, there is an important precedent. In other words, if we look at the scale and scope diplomatically of the difficulty of the Americans and the Iranians reaching this deal, it inspires and motivates hope for Armenia-Turkey. In other words, the US and the United States have been locked in a battle since 1979. This is that important and a breakthrough agreement. If Iran and America can sit down and do this, why not Armenia-Turkey? Moreover, why not Armenia and Azerbaijan? The answer in that case, frankly, is that Armenia no longer has a partner for peace in Azerbaijan. But for Armenia-Turkey, this will not only pressure Turkey, but also motivate.
The new chapter in Armenia-Turkey relations, do you see any possibility of these tensions are piling up until April 24th, and then there will be a decrease in tensions and there will be more pragmatism, more practical cooperation, even though the Armenian government already withdrew the protocols, for instance, stating that or indicating that they are not interested at this stage. Does this have to do with April 24, or this is a far-going process and the interests are different now on Armenia and Turkey?
Let's talk first of all in terms of where we are in the all-important centennial anniversary of the Armenian genocide. What we see in many ways, my personal opinion, is as important, as emotional, and as historic that April 24th is. We need to devote equal resources and attention not to April 24th, but to April 25th. In other words, once we pass the 100-year mark, we need to be careful that we lose the momentum in terms of also engaging with those Turks, the intellectuals in Turkish society, who are coming to terms with the genocide, if not recognizing it. That's the arena that matters most, even more than the French parliament or the Swedish parliament, for example.
Who recognize Armenian genocide?
Yes. My point here is we need to actually sustain the momentum in dealing with the issue beyond simply a one-day period. My criticism, however, is for too long, we've been trapped in a cycle of victimization, where mourning and understanding the genocide as we are the victims of Ottoman Turkey, etc., that's understandable, but it's not enough. In many ways, we need to graduate beyond victimization to victory. In other words, the most important element of the genocide commemoration for me, the grandson of a survivor, was the fact that we survived. We're becoming stronger than ever. In other words, the genocide failed. We need to put as much attention into our own victory and survival and our moral high ground as we do into the victimization. Having said that, what we see now is the Armenian government, the Armenian president's decision to withdraw the protocols was a very smart tactic and not strategy. In other words, what it represented was a half step, a demonstration justified that Armenian patience is not without limit. And the burden is squarely on Turkey more than Armenia. This was a good move. It was not a change in policy, however. We still have a prudent policy in Armenia of no preconditions, of willing to engage. But our patience is not without limit. Therefore, more pressure will be exerted on Turkey. What's coming next is...
More pressure from Armenia?
No, international. What we see is two seminal events, two watershed moments. April 25th, the day after the genocide commemoration, but also June 8th, the day after presidential parliamentary elections in Turkey. What this means is there will be yet another fresh opportunity for re-engagement once Turkey passes through both storms, if you will. They may be more self-confident as well after the election, as well as after April 24th. We also know that there is a statement coming, a prime ministerial or presidential statement on April 24th from Turkey, similar to a precedent that was set last year by then Prime Minister Erdogan. So the process is moving, and in 2015, after these events, The latter half of the year should include many movement or much in terms of developments under the surface that will then come out publicly in 2016 with a new timetable. And it's again about implementing the terms of the protocols.
So it's all about, everything is said in the protocols. It's just the will of the both governments to take it forward. Is there anything missing in the protocols?
Yes. In other words, first of all, as you say, it's a question of the missing ingredient, political will and strategic vision. We've had political will on both sides, but usually not at the same time. And we do need the stars to realign. But what we're looking at is the implementation of two specific terms of the protocols and not the entire protocols. We will see making what we have today, unofficial diplomatic relations, more official. What this entails is most realistically the Turkish ambassador to Georgia being accredited to Armenia and not the opening of a Turkish embassy in the beginning. Secondly, it's not opening the borders, but it's opening two border crossing points. The idea is gradual practical steps that allow the Turks to contain Azerbaijani backlash. What's missing, however, perhaps fortunately, is the idea of a historical subcommission. Now, my personal analysis is it's too premature to criticize that original plan. In other words, for me personally, a historical subcommission, it's too soon to say how bad or how good it would be. It depends on the mandate, the mission, and the membership. In other words, my suggestion was if a subcommission devoted to history is to be empowered, then why not focus on the aftermath of the genocide and not the genocide itself? In other words, do not allow a direct challenge to the veracity of the genocide through this mechanism. Rather, why not jointly study the aftermath, including property restitution, rather than attacking the genocide in terms of history itself? But what we see is this is no longer on the table in terms of just normalization. And that's the final important element. What we're talking about is not reconciliation. Rather, this is simply normalizing relations, minimal demand, as all nations do, of having open borders and diplomatic relations. This is the foundation which then we can build or work toward reconciliation.
Well, you mentioned two important aspects, normalization versus reconciliation, or not versus, but followed up by reconciliation.
As a prerequisite.
In the future. However, even without official relations and with having borders closed, there are other processes going on between civil society groups, businessmen, and other interested groups. And you yourself participate in different activities in Armenia-Turkey, in normalization of Armenia-Turkey relations. How important these activities are in terms of the future Armenia-Turkish relations on political level?
Well, it's important if we look at the civil society effort. It's important not only for the future of this process, but for the present. In other words, much of our work as civil society actors in Armenia, working and engaged in support of normalization, is really first and foremost about sustaining momentum and not giving up or giving in. Secondly, it's necessary and essential to ensure that once we do normalize relations, we can continue toward reconciliation. In other words, if Turkey comes today and says it's opening the border and establishing diplomatic relations, that's fine. But I would not praise Turkey. I would not reward Turkey, because that's the basic minimum of behavior of states in this world today. They shouldn't be rewarded for doing what's expected. Rather, it's not enough. We need to galvanize and mobilize our momentum in terms of reaching a higher level of engagement. In that context, we are ambitious, we are bold, in also holding our own government to account. In other words, Accountability in terms of a need for strategic leadership and statesmanship by the Armenian government itself.
So you have any plans in future in Armenia-Turkey relations, supporting Armenia-Turkey relations on any level? Can you say a little bit more? What do you expect, or what you yourself would expect for improvement of relations?
Even more practically, what we see is after the Turkish elections in June, we will see a new round of activities in support of normalization, where a delegation, official delegation from the Republic of Turkey is coming to Yerevan in June to attend the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, which Yerevan is hosting. But this is the first of many rather unofficial diplomatic contacts that will be building momentum even further. Moreover, what we see, even in the past year, even in this environment of suspension, we've had Foreign Minister Davutoglu visit Yerevan in that December. Foreign Minister Nalbandian, much to his credit, attended the presidential inauguration of Erdogan in Turkey. In other words, Armenia's diplomatic representation at that inauguration was much higher than the Americans. It was that important. Moreover, what we see is these contacts, in terms of building momentum, also translate into a new reality, where both sides have gone too far to go back to what used to be.
One last question, again getting back to the Nagorno-Karabakh issue. You know, the tensions are also very high on the front line there, and it also influences the Armenia-Turkey relations. And we talked about this. So even without any step forward on Nagorno-Karabakh front in terms of getting closer to the peace, there is a chance for Armenia-Turkey development. So I just want to once again
the short
stress
answer
this
is
issue.
no. The short answer is no. Let's be honest and realistic. Without an element of progress over Nagorno-Karabakh, Armenia-Turkish normalization, it would be very difficult to proceed. What's interesting, however, is the amount of flexibility from the Turkish side as well in exaggerating what really constitutes progress. In other words, it's much less of a real demand and much more of a useful avenue to justify politically. In other words, it reflects, one, that we are still hostage to Turkish domestic politics in terms of the success, but moreover, with each attack by Azerbaijan, with each violation of the ceasefire, this is a direct threat not only to Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh, but it's a direct threat to Turkish interests in the region and to Turkish policy. Interestingly, we see quiet Turkish diplomatic activity in support of Armenia, seeing these attacks from Azerbaijan as a threat to its own position, a threat to regional stability. And the outbreak of war is as dangerous to Turkey. But what we need to do is to maintain our advantage and our strong position. What's the weak link is if we do accept the premise that Armenian foreign policy is in a stronger position, we have to understand that we're in a stronger position based on mistakes by Turkey and mistakes by Azerbaijan. We need to go beyond that and to make Armenian foreign policy even stronger based on achievements and victories by Armenia, not just mistakes and deficiencies by our rivals.
Thank you very much. Very interesting, and I hope that some of your prognosis will be realized in 2015 or 2016 in terms of normalization of Armenia-Turkey relations. Thanks again, Richard. We were talking with Richard Giragosyan, the Director of Regional Studies Center within the Line of Contact Armenia-Turkey normalization process. We'll meet next time in the Line of Contact.